to episode number 27 of Office Hours. Hello. Come on in. Have a seat. We're going to talk about GMing. If you have never been to my office before, here's how it works. Several of you, many of you in fact, lots of you, have visited my website, www.adam-coble.com, and you've clicked on that office hours link, you've filled out the form, you've recorded your lovely voices or had someone else do it for you, submitted your questions to me, and week by week, for now unto these long 27 weeks, I've been answering them 3 at a time right here on Office Hours. So that's how it works. We're going to answer some questions today about game mastery, little design stuff, little social stuff. The questions are, as always, a bit of a mixed bag, which is cool. I'm excited. And yeah, and so we'll answer them. I'll probably, this first question, I'll have some digression on. I'm definitely going to digress because there's a spot in here I'm curious about digging into a little bit. But here comes question number 1.
Hey Adam, at the end of the last question of episode 11, you talked about challenging your players, like using role-playing games to investigate how we think about the world. Well, I recently ran a one-shot that did plenty of that, and I am hooked. Now I'm trying to sneak it into every game that I run, and I'm worried that it might start to annoy some of my players. So here's my question. In games that present themselves as being pure popcorn entertainment, like D&D for example, how do I introduce thematic questions to my players in ways that won't make them roll their eyes?
So here's the thing. Right? So this is tricky. This is real tricky because it requires, to make this work, to make this whole thing work, which is to say thematic, philosophical, social, whatever in a role-playing game, using an RPG to discuss something above and beyond just playing a game requires, like everything in tabletop role-playing games, like everything in a conversation, it requires buy-in. It requires that everybody get on the same page. We all jump on board for the big win, and we head for the goal together, right? I'm gonna reiterate that, right? It requires buy-in for this stuff to work. You can't just slip it in there and expect, and I'm not saying you're doing this, James. I'm just saying don't do this. You can't just slip in the old philosophy stuff. You can't be like, yeah, but Hegel though, right? What about, yeah. You gotta get buy-in because here's the thing. The players agree to something when you sign up to play a game. They agree to the premise of the game. They agree to the situation you've all posited as part of the game together. And if you change that or fuck with it midstream, you're throwing a wrench into their expected experience. You're essentially pulling the rug out from under them. And it's not to say you can't surprise people, because you can. But in a game like Dungeons and Dragons, if you promise dungeon crawling shenanigans, which Dungeons and Dragons does inherently by being Dungeons and Dragons, you can't then suddenly expect a positive response to, but you were the monster all along. Right? Because that's some horseshit right there. And let's talk about why. So, you know what, actually, I'm gonna speak from my own experience, because pretty much every game, and you may see me doing this and be like, but Adam, I've seen you do that. And I wanna speak to my own experience about this, because basically every game I've ever run, to some degree or another, has social issues underlying the campaign. And this is by design. I can point to each campaign and say what the core social or philosophical thing I was going for was, right? Like Swan Song, diversity, mirror shades, racism, burning wheel, classism, Court of Swords. You haven't seen it yet much, but colonialism. There's things in these games that I care about and have inserted into them, but let's use some concrete examples. So in Swan Song, I wanted to tell a story that was diverse. I believe that science fiction should be a diverse space. I wanted to include characters of varying cultures and genders, and I wanted my universe to be full of all the kinds of people that we see on Earth, magnified, 1,000-fold. I wanted this big, interesting universe full of different people. And I talked about this with the cast, and y'all didn't see this because we didn't do those like pre-game or post-game things before. But I talked with the cast at the start, being like, look, this is my goal, right? This is my thing. I want this game to be diverse. I want the universe to be diverse. And while this isn't going to be a game about diversity, right? It's not going to be like Swan Song, a beautiful rainbow of colors. It was going to be a diverse universe, and that was just a thing that was going to happen. And obviously nobody had a problem with that, because if you have a problem with diversity, you're a piece of shit. We all bought into the idea of a universe with, a psychic Islamic caliphate and Swahili being a major trade language in this universe. It wasn't as if it came as a surprise to anyone. I didn't sneak that in. I wasn't like, yeah, but culture though, right? Like, white people, there's all these brown people in space. We hit that note right from the get-go, and it was just part of the part of the universe. And what I did from there was pay attention to the things that the players were interested in too, because I'm a relatively philosophical person. When we weren't spending episodes making jokes about jizz for 4 hours, I paid attention to the way that, for example, like Wheat through Peony responded to Pie, and I was picking up on Wheat's like dad vibes, and I sort of probed that space with that character. I didn't necessarily come to the table with that. That wasn't intentional from the get-go. But so much of GMing is listening and not speaking. And so using my listening muscles, I was able to pick up on some themes that emerged from the player's side. You can see it happening with Jeff too, right? Like, I know that Jeff is a person who thinks about... He's got a mind that thinks about war, right? He plays Warhammer. He's interested in tactical stuff. He thinks about what it means to be engaged in conflict, right? That's a factor in the kind of fiction he's interested in. And so to that end, I started to kind of probe the space around like, what does death mean? And through Pi, which was my sort of primary philosophical mouthpiece, I was able to explore that philosophy. Like, what does death mean, Jeff? Let's have that conversation. In Mirror Shades was way, way easier, because if you're playing Shadowrun and racism isn't a part of your game in any way, you're missing a huge piece of what Shadowrun is about, right? Because race is huge in Shadowrun. And I said to the players when we first sat down, I was like, all right, y'all, so this is Shadowrun. On the surface level, the very top level, it's cyberpunk meets Dungeons and Dragons. It's dwarves and elves and trolls and magic, but also cyberware and cool, slick rock stars and mega corporations. And it's all that mixed together, and it's a cool setting. But like underpinning it, there's all this like race conflict. And our game wasn't about racism, right? Like, it wasn't like Mirror Shades, a game about racism. It just was a part of the setting. And I picked that up from Shadowrun, and I was like, this is just going to be part of the campaign. It's part of every Shadowrun game, right? And you can see it happening, right? People were shitty to orcs and trolls. People were kind of reverent towards elves and treated them better than maybe they should be treated. Anyway, the whole point here is that it wasn't a gotcha. We discussed it in advance. It came up. It was part of the game. And the thing here is, if you're actively going out of your way with the intention to use role-playing games to explore a thing, you want your friends to be on board with that from the get-go, right? So sneaking it into a game like Dungeons and Dragons is going to be real tricky for you unless you're paying attention to the kind of stuff that D&D is already saying about social issues, which we'll get to in a second. But the thing is, like, sometimes this stuff will surprise you. This stuff will pop up. Players will get interested in something. You'll go in a direction that you didn't expect. And as long as you're all bought in and checking with each other along the way, cool, go for it. If you end up in a philosophical place via Dungeons and Dragons, that's great, cool. But consider too that forcing it and forcing like heavy stuff into a game, sometimes people use role-playing games to take a step back from their real life, right? The world is full of all kinds of tense, frustrating, sometimes scary bullshit. And sometimes we just want to be murdery hobo types to get away from things. And it can be tricky if you're playing, especially if you're playing with people who experience any kind of marginalization in their life. Because if you try to force that issue in game, you're essentially confronting them with something that is already a part of their life all the time, right? Like, for example, having NPCs be racist to Crusher, a troll in Mirror Shades, constantly felt like a much safer interchange between JP and I, because that's not something that JP experiences daily. I would have been more explicit about talking to him about that and getting permission if it was more like his like real life, you know? Keep in mind this stuff specifically and generally, people deal with harsh stuff and sometimes it's invisible. So be gentle. Don't try to sneak in some stuff like this without talking to your players and testing the waters first. And the other thing is, and honestly, I'm not a great example of this, is choosing the right game to tell these sorts of stories, right? Shadowrun, that was good on me. I did the right thing. Stars Without Number, I think to a degree because of the tables, the random tables for NPCs, I think does the diversity thing well too, but it doesn't, I don't always pick the right game because I'm not always picking games for this purpose. Sometimes it comes up. And the thing about Dungeons and Dragons, specifically about D&D, because that's what you asked about, D&D will never be a good platform for nuanced dialectical debate about morality in the face of violence. Because if anything, Dungeons and Dragons is a nasty, othering, colonial mess. And we're sort of implicitly intended to be a part of that mess in order to succeed as characters in Dungeons and Dragons. Like, if you think about it, your job is to kill and rob sentient people who are different from you for your own gain. And you become a more powerful person by doing that. So if you're going to explore anything in D&D philosophically, right, you're going to have to butt up against and sometimes try to bash through the whole premise of the game. Because the very first moral quandary is that, who are we to just start murdering these sentient creatures and taking their stuff? And if people start to question that, then you've lost D&D altogether. Questioning the core premise, the colonial murder hoboing, if you question that in Dungeons and Dragons, you have, in effect, decided not to play Dungeons and Dragons anymore. Unless you're doing the whole, like, look at how horrible we are, right? Like, unless you go the Dr. Grigori route and you're like, yes, I know, Dungeons and Dragons characters are evil. You're not going to get the nuanced, like, debate. That's why D&D has alignment. Even though a lawful good character can go out murdering orcs, right? It has moral absolutism for that reason. So here's the thing. If you've got an idea in your head of the sort of thing you want to explore philosophically, like if you have an idea, dig around for a game that might support that better than Dungeons and Dragons, because I think you can be explicit about this stuff. You can play a game like Dogs in the Vineyard that intentionally explores the religious authority space. You could play a game like Fiasco that explores the often tragic nature of human desire, albeit in a pretty funny way most of the time. You can play Masks, right? Masks is a game about identity and being one person but presenting yourself as a different one. There are games that work better or worse for different topics, but it doesn't mean that you can't focus on that stuff in your game, whatever it is. You just have to, like with all games, remember that you might be struggling more with the game than having the game help you. And that's okay. That's a struggle that you and your players are allowed to take on, but you want to do it with your players. And honestly, y'all know me. You know how I GM. You know what I'm about. I love a good kind of feelsy game. I like games that end up telling stories that make us laugh uncomfortably to break tension. I like games that make us pause to think about the conversations we're having that impact things for us, right? And I want things that hit a deeper note. I want us to feel something in these games. And to do that, I talk to my players, right? I have a conversation with them about what that looks like. And then we do it together. Get your players to weigh in. Have them tell you what they're interested in, and then listen to them when you play. Listen. That's the most important thing. So, I mean, good luck, right? Good luck with that. It can be very difficult.
Hey, Adam. I'm still a relatively new GM, and I have finally been afflicted by the dreaded GM fatigue. I still like the game I'm playing. I just don't quite look forward to it as much anymore. I kind of, thinking about it makes me feel exhausted, and when we're playing it, I just find it hard to, come up with ideas and stuff. So I just figured I'd ask what tips or advice, I guess, you have on how to deal with or avoid, fatigue. I know the most obvious answer is stop playing for a while, but I figured I'd just see if there was anything else I could do. Thanks.
So Pyrotex earns 2 bonus points here. 1 for that excellent delivery of GM fatigue, and 2 for acknowledging the core answer to this question and getting it out of the way. You just take a break, yo. But I love the way that Pyrotex phrased this, right? Like, I get that the answer is probably take a break, but I don't want to take a break. Give me something better. That's good. I really like that. So this is great. I think GM fatigue is unavoidable. You cannot avoid it. You can try, you can work through it, you can help prevent it to a degree, but if you're playing enough games, or you're playing the same game long enough, you will get fatigue, you will get tired out, you will have those moments where you're like, fuck this, fuck GMing, fuck this game, fuck these players, I'm not interested in this anymore, I'm going to burn down Gary Gygax's house. Don't do that, he's dead already, he won't care. But let's talk about what we can do as GMs, and I'll talk about what I personally do to try to mitigate GM fatigue, and maybe that will help you too. Everybody has different stuff around this, because this isn't really a GMing thing. This is a creative fatigue thing, and I think everybody is going to be a little bit different. So first of all, learning to recognize GM fatigue and knowing what it feels like for you is kind of a big deal, and it's cool because it sounds like you're already there, knowing that you're fatigued. For me, the big trouble comes from, is this fatigue, or am I bored of this game? I get bored easily. And it happens between sessions, not at the table. I'm never bored when I'm playing a role-playing game. It's great. It feels nice. However, when I'm GMing, sometimes I'm bored as a player. Anyway, recognizing it is a thing. Knowing what the symptoms of fatigue feel like to you and being able to figure it out. I think the thing is, for folks who are maybe not as practiced at picking out when they're feeling fatigued, it can show up for lots of reasons. For me, it's often a combination of doing too much creative stuff at once, right? Like running too many games, or juggling too much stuff, combining doing like role-playing games and other like hard work. Like when I was designing Dungeon World, I was pretty much only running Dungeon World as playtest because I didn't have the juice to do both things, right? It was real tricky to try to manage that. So my brain tends not to be able to focus. And when I'm all over the place, I start to get worn down and my GMing suffers. Or it's getting tired of or bored of the system that I'm playing. Not necessarily the campaign. It comes from the game first and bleeds into the campaign. I definitely get exhausted with the mechanisms of games. I start to feel like, and this is how I can tell, this is what I do, right? You can maybe you can see it happen. I don't know that it's really like aggressively. I've tried to like keep it from you. I try to hide it from you so you don't see it. But if I start to feel like I don't give a shit about playing by the rules, or I want to skip or bypass the procedures of a game, that's a big indicator for me the GM fatigue is setting in. If I'm like, okay, I guess we could roll initiative, but no, whatever, you kill them. Cool. Okay, let's move on. Or I forget to hand out experience because I don't give a shit about it, or I'm not playing properly. I'm just arbitrarily making hand-wavy decisions about the game. That's me getting bored, right? Because I don't want to play the game anymore, but I'm still interested in the campaign. I start to get sick about stuff. I'm just like, blah, fuck the rules. That's a big indicator for me GM fatigue is setting in. I don't care anymore. I can also tell, and this one's a little trickier. We're going to talk about neurology and social stuff a little bit, but I can also tell that I'm getting fatigued when I have a predominantly anxious feeling before a game. Like, I hope someone will cancel, or I hope something will happen so that we don't have to play. That to me is an indicator I need to change something, because I'm like, I don't actually want to play this game today. I want to hang out with my friends. That would be fun, but like, I don't want to run this shit. I don't have any ideas. I don't care about this game anymore. I feel anxious, and I think it would be nice maybe if somebody called in sick to the game and I could just like have an excuse not to play. But I have to be careful with that one, because that's not always a sign of GM fatigue. Sometimes that's a sign of me being just generally kind of anxious. I get that feeling a lot. Sometimes just about doing other things that aren't role-playing games. So it's not always the game's fault. Sometimes that's just me being socially anxious. There have been loads of sessions. No, you know what? Every session, I would say that I've felt that anxious feeling before the game. By the time we're actually playing, we've gotten over that hump of initial warm-up. By the time I get into the game and we're talking about the fiction stuff, that anxious feeling tends to bleed away from me. Actually playing role-playing games, GMing role-playing games is very rarely a dull affair for me. I quite like it. I always come out the other end feeling happy that I played. And I think, too, in between sessions, prep can do this to you. If you're playing a game that demands a lot of prep work, you're not just playing the 4 or 6 or 3 or whatever number of hours at the table. You're playing this game 8 or 10 or 12 hours a week. Right? Do you look forward to your prep? Or do you feel like it's homework? Do you feel burned out? Like, oh God, I gotta make a dungeon and I don't care about that and I don't feel inspired or interested. That can be a sign you're getting fatigued too. If your prep work feels like necessary homework so that you don't hate yourself while you're playing the game, that can be a sign of fatigue as well. And I think that this stuff is a case of creative fatigue more than anything. It's your brain recognizing that you're going to have to spend another 4 hours like on and focused and making shit up and trying to entertain both yourself and each other. And role-playing games have the advantage of being a group activity where some of that pressure is shared around. Most of the time, we are playing games in which we're the ones dealing with a higher percentage as game masters of that fatigue. And so it leads to GM burnout. Players get bored. Players drop out because they're not interested. They drop out on one end, right? They drop out on the low end, and we drop out on the high end. We burn out, and players fade out. Which isn't to say that players aren't engaging, that players don't do work. I just find, in my experience, that GMs get overworked, and players will drop out for feeling underworked or disinterested. Player fatigue, I feel, is a different thing. And we won't address that here. This is GM fatigue. We'll talk about player fatigue maybe in a future episode. So how do we fix all this stuff? How do we take the pressure off? How do we escape, especially campaign play being taxing and intense? How do we check ourselves lest we wreck ourselves? Well, first of all, don't do too much of it. I mean, God, like, we can get in this position as GMs where we're just so desperate to play that we're like, fuck yes, I'm gonna play all the games. Just Burning Wheel and Dungeon World and Apocalypse World and Monster Hearts and Dungeons and Dragons and another Dungeons and Dragons game. And sure, I will totally run Fate. I've never played Fate before. Yeah, I'll do that. Cool. Oh God, now I have 6 games to prep for, and I have a job and maybe a kid and friends, and I need to eat. And then suddenly you can't be a person anymore. Don't do that. Don't burn yourself out, right? Like, I'm only able to play as much role-playing games as I do because games are my job. Thinking about role-playing games and prepping for them is also my job. Talking about them is my job. And that's like 40 hours a week that I can now use for role-playing games, right? Like, but I do have a limit. I have an upper limit. 4 games a week, right? Two for Roll20, 2 for roleplay is my ceiling. I know not to push myself past that. I'll do one-shots here and there, but that's it. That's what I can prep and run without feeling all fucked up. And I learned that by pushing too hard, by going past that point and recognizing all of my games suffered because I was past that limit. And I'm learning now where that line, I've learned where that line is, and I'm learning how to say no to taking on more stuff. And it's fucking hard, right? I could make a list of like 24 people that I would love to start playing role-playing games with right now. I could make a list of twice that number of games that I want to play, one-shots or campaigns of, and sometimes multiples, right? I could run several games of the same system right now if I wanted to, but I know that would burn me out. I would blow out my ability to be good at my job, both as a GM and as a person. I would be shitty at what I do. So it's trial and error, right? Like, look at how much you're playing. And this isn't just, let's talk a little bit about scheduling, because this isn't just the number of games you're playing. You don't necessarily have to say 4 games a week is my thing. If you're playing 4 open-ended campaigns, that can be super taxing because a campaign may not have an end in sight. And not knowing where the end is like running a race forever. You don't know when you're going to be allowed to stop running. So having regular check-in sessions or knowing where your sort of season finale is can give you a sense of boundaries around time. And it can feel less like you'll never have a chance to take a breather. Because campaign play can feel like, okay, here we go. Session 1. Session 2, 3, 4, 6, 12, 20, 16,000, 32,000. Like, you're playing until you die because it's a campaign and that's what Gary wants. Don't do that. Be like, we're going to check in every 12 sessions. We're going to check in during arcs. We're not going to play 32,000 sessions. Campaigns are great. But don't commit yourself to playing forever. Give yourself a chance to like talk about it. And here's the thing I think that we don't think about much, but for me contributes to taxing as a GM, right? To feeling taxed out, to feeling like you're getting that fatigue situation. It's scheduling. And this can mean if the game is too late at night and you end up being tired the next day, right? If you're playing until 2 a.m. and you have to work at 6, that's bullshit. That's gonna burn you out unless you're somehow able to take naps and fill in your sleep schedule, right? So if the game is in the wrong time for you, you could be playing more often than you're comfortable with, right? Is once a week too much? Are you playing twice a week? Is it too often do you need more time between sessions? And alternately, if the game is at seemingly random times every week, you can feel taxed out by not knowing when the next game will be, right? If you know that your game is going to be at 2 o'clock every single Tuesday, when you finish the session, you can say, I have 7 days before the next session. But if you finish that session, you're like, I have no idea when we're playing again. It could be in 2 days or it could be in 3 weeks. You don't know what to expect. And that unexpected sensation can be very stressful. So controlled, comfortable scheduling with a clear start and end time, for me, super important. If you start at 6, start at 6. And if you finish at 10, fucking finish at 10. Don't play till midnight. Right? Stick to your boundaries. Boundaries are not about shutting down possibility. They're about creating a space that you feel comfortable in, because discomfort leads to stress, and stress makes bad GMs. I also think that like wearing the wrong shoes, playing the wrong game is going to chafe like hell, and it's going to make fun into bad work. So maybe the game is fatiguing you. If you're not playing by the rules, if you don't care about the rules, if you're skipping them more often than not, play a different game. Just play something different. Talk to your group. Get buy-in. Agree. Play something different. Take a break, right? Take a break. If you're worried about your schedule slipping, and this is a thing, sometimes we play because we don't want to ruin the momentum. Because ruined momentum can damage a campaign. I've had campaigns do this, where it's like, we missed a week. Okay, people are less likely to come the next week. Okay, we missed 2 weeks. We missed 3 weeks. Fuck it, game's over. Forget it. It just came apart. We haven't played for a month, right? So take a break, but you don't have to take a break from your group. You don't have to all take a break from the game. Let someone else GM for a session. Play Follow Magic, right? Just hang out. Play a board game, whatever. Get together. Be people in a space. Share that responsibility around. It'll give you a chance to recharge. Do a thing together. Stick to the schedule so you can keep that momentum up. But try something else. I mean, for me, the big challenge is always knowing how much to commit when I'm feeling bored. I'm a big system nerd. Like, no shit, right? And I love playing new games. So when I get bored, it's usually because of one of two things. I saw a movie or a TV show, or I read a book or a comic or something, and I was like, fuck, I want to play this as a role-playing game. And so I've like been digging for new role-playing games to play, and I'm like, ooh, let's play this instead. Because fuck whatever we were doing, even though I actually love it. Fuck that. Get that thing out of here. Go away. I'm really bad at RPG system monogamy. I'm really bad at regular monogamy too. Or some new role-playing game has come out, finally, right? Like a Kickstarter finished, or like somebody sent me a game, they're like, oh, you'll like this, and I read it, and I'm like, holy fuck. I want to play this. I'm going to play this shit right now. But I know 4 games is my max, and I'm already playing 4, so what can I kill to replace with this new thing? Because like with relationships, we have an infinite amount of space for love in our heart, but we have not got an infinite amount of time in our lives. So for me, it's often about getting excited and trying to like push out something I'm least interested in to make room in my schedule for something new. And that's not always smart. I always give myself time to not be so fucking fickle with games, right? Because there've been games that I've been like, oh fuck, ooh, I gotta play this game. I really gotta play this. And I'm reading it and I'm excited. I'm thinking about making characters. I'm thinking about campaign premises. And then like a week later, I'm like, meh, bleh, whatever, get out of here, right? I stopped thinking about it. I stopped caring about it because I get excited about systems, but I'm also, I think, really committed to the idea of engaging with a system and playing it a lot. And so sometimes I can get ahead of myself. What I'll often do is I'll get really excited about a game, I'll read it, and then I'll put it on the shelf and be like, when I'm ready, when it's time for this kind of game, now I can come back to this thing. But that new game energy thing, I need to recognize that it's not about boredom. It's about getting excited about something and trying to fit it in. So here's the thing, like that's all me. That's all the way that I handle and understand role-playing games. And you Pyrotechs, but you listeners, have to learn what your fatigue is telling you as a person, right? Listen to the feelings that you get when you're playing games and understand why you feel that way. What is it particularly that's making you feel fatigued? Because then you can pick out that problem and fix it. This stuff is different for everybody because as human beings, we have diverse neurology. We have diverse ways of thinking and responding to things. And what for me might signal time to give up might mean take a break or double down for someone else. Which is why I said at the beginning that this is kind of a personal thing. And whatever reason, however you get at this, you always want to try to give your fatigue some space, right? Listen to the things that your brain and your body are telling you. You don't get fatigue for nothing. It might not even be related to the game that you're playing, right? You might just be like having a shitty time with a relationship. You might be having a rough time at work or school. Your parents might be being shitty to you. All these things can happen and cause fatigue. You might not be eating well. You might be sick. There's all kinds of things that can tell your brain and body, stop having fun, stop playing this role-playing game, disengage, don't do it. Know how your brain works. Know thyself, right? These things could be a sign of all kinds of stuff. You might not just be feeling GM fatigue. You might be feeling person fatigue. And all that stuff is okay. It's all valid ways to feel about being a person or being a game master. And if you listen to your brain, you listen to your body, and you understand what it's telling you, you're going to have a better time at GMing. GMing is pretty much the best shit that there is, right? Running a role-playing game can be such a rewarding experience. And because we're chasing that experience, because we're addicted to that feeling of like really telling a cool story with our friends and having a great time with the mechanisms of a system, we can put ourselves through some bullshit. And that stuff shouldn't come at the cost of your mental health, right? Kill PCs, not yourself while playing. Get to know your brain. Learn to listen to all the things that it tells you. You and your brain are going to get along a lot better. It's going to help you avoid fatigue, and it's going to make you a better GM when you are playing. And that's the thing that matters most. Right?
Hi, Adam. I'm Alice, also known as Fidget98160, and I'm about to start GMing Shadowrun 3rd Edition. I've been working in character creation, and my friend decided that for his character, they wanted to have him have used electronics to jury-rig a small capacitor for his shot gloves, which would provide an emergency recharge system, because you can only use them 8 times within an hour. I've been working on how to balance this, and I kind of wanted to know, how do you handle situations when a player comes up with modifications to weapons or other things that have already balanced rules set up around them, and not be too unreasonable at that and say that the character just wouldn't know how to actually modify the weapon in that way, when based on their skill set, it seems like they would.
All right. So Fidget, your question. This is a good one because it's nice and specific. Nice and specific. I like it. Specificity. I think it also speaks to a larger opportunity for talking about game balance, right? So I'm going to answer your specific question, but also we're going to talk about what this question kind of means in a larger game context. So thank you. Thank you, Fidget. That's awesome. So Shadowrun 3rd Edition particularly is a very, I was going to say fidgety game. So you're on par with this one. It's a very mechanical game. It's got tons of little fucking bits and pieces that move around inside it and can make it kind of complicated to hack. And that's what your friend is trying to do here. Your friend is trying to hack the game. And that's cool and okay, right? Coming up with player-created stuff is a form of hacking the mechanisms because it requires you understand why the mechanisms are the way that they are. You have to understand why they were designed that way in the first place. You have to trust the designers to have designed things in a balanced way, and we'll get to this later, Shadowrun. And you have to know how to reverse engineer that shit so that you are still making something that doesn't totally fuck with the rules of the game. So let me rephrase this question, because not everybody is going to be familiar with shock gloves and capacitors, but I think for the most part we understand Dungeons and Dragons. So let's illustrate this thing with some alternate versions of this question. I'm playing a fighter. My character was a blacksmith prior to becoming an adventurer. It's in my background. And I'm making my character. And you've decided to give me plate armor, right? I would like this plate armor not to have armor class 18. I would rather have AC 19. So I want AC 19 plate armor. Also, I'm a blacksmith, so I could install some kind of stealth padding so that I don't have the stealth disadvantage. Okay? Oh wait, also, I want a longsword that does 2d8 damage. Not its normal, like 2d8. Yeah. I'm a blacksmith. I could make a really sharp longsword, right? I should be allowed. Now, I know that your player probably isn't being an egregious douchebag here. Basically, what they're saying is, I don't like a downfall of a previously balanced piece of equipment, so I'm going to try to fictionally position myself to convince you to let me cheat. I have skills. I have electronics. I know that the game designers intentionally put this limitation on these shock gloves to represent a game balance factor and a fictional factor, right? Because batteries are only so big. But I don't care. I don't care. I made a character that can bypass this. But despite the fact that I'm being so flippant about this and I'm kind of painting them to be a jerk, it's not a bad idea. That's what skills are for. That's why characters have that shit. It's a great idea. They're just doing it at exactly the wrong section of the game. They're doing it at the wrong time. Right? It's the context that isn't reasonable, not the idea. Because the reason that we have skills in a game like Shadowrun is so that we have mechanical impetus to make statements about certain aspects of play. 5 dice in electronics, for example, means as a character, I'm imparting to my player the ability to say shit about electronics and roll those dice to back up the things that I say. And that's what nearly all conflict resolution or task resolution systems in role-playing games do. I'm talking about the core shit of role-playing games. Having abilities, putting dice or points or whatever into something is telling the world at large, when we have an argument, when I say, this is true, when I say, I shot you, and you say, no, you didn't, I have 5 points in shooting you that let me say, when I shoot you, I am 5 points more likely to get what I want. That's what skills are for. That's what these things do in games. But there's an aspect of risk and reward. We're playing into that system. There has to be a chance for failure, right? Character creation has no fiction in Shadowrun. Some games it does have fiction, but in Shadowrun, character creation, and this is true of lots of games, we've discussed this before, while part of the game is, it's of the world, but not in the world, so to speak. And so it doesn't engage in the risk and reward mechanisms of a tabletop role-playing game. So unless you're playing Traveler, there's no real risk to engage a reward structure. The player is asking for something impossible. Just because you have a skill allows you to roll for it, but not to just have the things that you want to have. You can't just say, because I have this skill, I get this. You say, because I have this skill, I would like the opportunity to roll, in which case you as the GM, your role there, the other role, not the one with the two L's, your role is to impart the difficulty of that task. You can say at the very beginning of the game, at the very first thing, sure, okay, I know you want to jury rig these gloves, but here's the difficulty. Here's the cost of the parts you're going to need. Here's the risk of what might occur if you fail. Go ahead. Make your roll. Use your character. Play the fucking game. Stop trying to pre-play the game, right? Stop putting in cheat codes. Doing so is going to re-establish and re-engage the risk and reward structure of the game. It's going to establish a counterbalance. The player can potentially have the thing that they want. And this is true of most stuff in role-playing games. You can have what you want. If somebody wants a 2d8 longsword, great. But let's establish what's at stake. How is it possible, right? Is it fictionally reasonable for you to go after that? And in theory, if the game is designed well, if the game has mechanical subsystems for this stuff, you can engage them. If not, it should have, at the very least, like Burning Wheel's obstacle system. If you want to craft a masterwork sword, you know that it's going to be whatever for a blacksmithing test. Whatever being a number. I don't have the blacksmithing obstacles burned into my mind. It's bad GMing, Adam. So, in theory, all that shit should balance out against the originally designed piece of gear, because that gear has a damage code for a reason, it has a charge for a reason, it costs a certain amount for a reason, and weighs a certain amount for a reason. Fundamentally, what you'd really like is for gear modification rules, because you should expect that maybe from Shadowrun, because it's so fucking gear heavy. You'd assume somewhere, whether in the core book or in a supplement, the designers have created a system for balancing that gear. Breaking it down, how they created the gear, and putting it into a supplement seems obvious, right? I want to say for 3rd edition Shadowrun, maybe the Cannon Companion. I had that book. Has a lady polishing an autocannon on the front. I think there might be something in there. But the point here is that there are systems in place that the designers used to make all the gear in the game, right? There's a reason why guns have a certain damage code based on how heavy they are, based on their concealability. Like all those things, there was a system that they used. So if they're imparting that to you, or you can reverse engineer it from the existing gear list, rock and roll. You're good to go if it doesn't have its own subsystem. Because if it doesn't have that subsystem, you're on your own. You got to either wing it or build your own, or steal it from another game, right? Like I didn't hate the FFG Star Wars gear customization thing. That was cool. We did a couple of sessions where they were able to refit their vibro swords and build new gear and fix their weapons. And I love customization, especially of guns. People fucking love that shit. Look at every successful shooter ever released in the last whatever. Look at Call of Duty, right? Look at games where you can switch out your silencer and your scope and your stock. And look at Fallout. Look at Fallout's all about that shit. The question, I guess, here is like, do you want to do this more than once? If it's a one-time thing, I would say just go for the roll. Say, yes, you can have the thing you want if you're able to achieve this difficulty on this roll with these costs involved. If this player is building their character around being a gun tinkerer, fuck it. You either have to design that system yourself, or they're going to have to design it, or you're both going to have to work together. And if that sounds like fun, fucking do it. If you don't want to do it, you can either say, no, I'm not invested enough in that. Maybe you want to change your concept. Maybe tinkering with guns isn't the best thing that you could do with your character in this campaign. Or you can do what I did in Swan Song Stories and be like, wait, I don't have time to make up my own fucking drug crafting system. You fucking do it. And he did, and it was great. It was so great, right? I was blown away. DJ Wheat has an alternate career in tabletop system design. He made a really cool system for basically adventuring gearing a chemistry kit into making drugs. And it was all really nicely balanced. And he like fundamentally understood the kind of miss, soft hit thing of the 2d6. I was so impressed. So honestly, if it's a one-time thing, just make the roll and move on. I think the thing is, like, with Shadowrun 3rd Edition particularly, don't pick it apart too much, because if we're going to be super real, Shadowrun's gear list it's already kind of bullshit to begin with. Like, most of the guns are pretty much the same. There's almost always a best gun that's just better than all the other ones for no apparent reason. They're not that well balanced. People should never pick certain weapons from the list. I don't even know why they're on there. There are clobs on every list. So you could probably do a better job than they did in this one regard. Fictionally, it's assumed that professionals engineered this equipment, so the best you're going to get is an unreliable or dangerous version of the thing that you want, and that's cool too, right? Steal liberally from Apocalypse World and just give your tinkerer the savvy head workspace rules, right? Just answer questions. Do that. Steal that subsystem. You're done. That you can have that. That's free. Do that now, right? I trust you to make the choices that work well for you as a player, for your other players together with you, and for your campaign. I trust you. You can do it. To the larger point, players that want to bypass the design of the game with no risk of failure are asking you to let them cheat, and they're telling you they don't actually want to play the game. They just want to have things for free. And fuck that. I think that your player will ultimately find it more fun to, play the game than just get what they want. So say no during character creation. Put a fucking timeout on that shit and say, get creative in-game. Let's see your character do this on the mean streets of Neo Seattle, right? Like, don't do this in the pre-fiction where there is no GM. You can't GM character creation. The GM role does not exist in that space. Engaging the risk and reward mechanisms of play is really why we play role-playing games, isn't it? We play them to play them. So don't let your players cheat at the game or cheat themselves out of that experience. Don't worry too much about balance. I think you'll figure that out as you go. You can use roles to mitigate that. Cool. So that's office hours. It's been a delight. These are great questions. I kind of want to play Shadowrun now, so thanks for that, Fidget. I don't actually know whether I should be thanking you. If you want to submit questions, you can go to my website, www.adam-koebel.com, hit that office hours link, fill out the form, record your lovely voice, and I will get to your question. As you can see from our first question, this is episode 27. We're answering questions from episode 11, so it could be a while before I get to you, but I am going through them 3 at a time, and I will get to you unless I've already answered a question that's just like it. You can always catch back episodes of Office Hours either on Twitch in my VODs or my playlist, or over on my YouTube channel. We've got the whole playlist there. New episodes go up on YouTube every Thursday afternoon. So hopefully we'll see you back here next week for episode 28, and if not, we'll catch you floating around the internet later. Thanks for coming, everybody. Have a good one. See you later.